Dr. Klimanagel, depending on where you are when you meet me. And we're here with brothers from the Black Men's Exchange with this very special guest. And as far as I'm told, we are actually live right now. So we're going to begin our discussion, but let me get the brothers, not you, Dr. Curry, you're going to be introduced last.
Okay.
Because you're going to be you the whole point of this whole thing. But I want Kashama and Duke to say hello to everybody.
Hello, everyone. My name is Duke. I'm a poet and author out of Baltimore City, and I work as a project coordinator for Black Men's Exchange, near Masking Center.
How y'all doing, family? Kashama Sankofa, humble freedom fighter from a small village in Florida, currently coming to you from an undisclosed location.
And I'm Klimanagel, and just Google me, and you get as much as you need to hear about all the stuff that I'm involved in. And I will be one of the guiders of the discussion today, along with Kashama and Duke. And let me welcome our special guest, who got up from Edinburgh to hang out with his brothers. And we really appreciate it. This is Dr. Tommy J. Curry. He's an author originally from the US. He's an author, professor of philosophy. He holds a personal chair of Africana philosophy and male Black studies at University in Edinburgh. In 2018, he won an American Book Award for Man Not, Race, Class, Genre, and the Dilemmas of Black Manhood. And there it is right there in Duke's hand. And we'll probably be seeing more of that book during our broadcast and talk about the book. But we're very, very honored to have Dr. Tommy J. Curry here. He's someone who I've seen his work actually transform people who were on the fence about caring about Black men. And then after they witnessed and experienced his book, went on and start caring about Black men, because a society is often contradicts that kind of notion, but he's helping people to become caring and humanizing of Black men along with other things. So thank you for being with us, Dr. Tommy J. Curry, and welcome.
Thank you for the invitation, sir.
You're very welcome. So, as you know, or may have recognized, our theme here is resisting envy, conflict, and murder. And let me explain where those three ideas came from. It's my perspective that what Black men go through, people always use terms like people are fearful of Black men, or people are intimidated by Black men, etc. But I believe that the Western world, particularly white men, but not only white men, envy Black men, the essence of Black men, the power, the swagger, the rhythm, the uniqueness of Black men, unique in the white context. We're not unique in the African context, we're everywhere in the African context, but we're people who came out of a Western experience. And I believe there's a lot of envy, and I think envy has led to murder. The conflicts that we face and deal with are for a lot of reasons, which we'll get into and deconstruct during our discussion with Dr. Curry. And we all know about the murder. The murder of Black men is 6 o'clock news now. The whole truth is not necessarily told about, but the sensation of having been murdered on video again and again and again and again and again and again by law enforcement and white vigilantes is now a central topic all over the country, but particularly in the Western world where it occurs the most. So those are reasons why those three terminologies was used: envy, conflict, and murder. But before we go any further, let's bring in the voice of Dr. Curry and get his introductory comments around anything that he feels like talking
about. First off, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm always humbled to speak to other Black men about ourselves. There's so few places in the world we could have genuine conversations without having to react to the stereotypes that other groups of people put on us. So I'm certainly appreciative of that. I think the moment that we're in right now calls not only for different kinds of reflections. It seems that every time Black men get shot, there's a brief moment where people, perform care, right? They perform the idea that we're human beings. But I think that we need to start looking at the different kinds of rhetorical tools and strategies that the world uses against us to dehumanize us. And this isn't just in the kinds of blatant racism and white supremacy that we're used to. It's not just in the propaganda that believes that we're murderers, rapists, thieves, and criminals. But this also comes from academic and white liberals, the ideas that are being pushed under a certain brand of popular feminism that believes that Black men are fundamentally toxic, that that's their norm, that by default Black men are hypersexual. I mean, when you read popular cultural critics like Bell Hooks, this is the first idea that jumps in from any of her commentaries. You have very smart brothers constantly writing pieces that are trying to debase Black men as if they're the white men of the Black race, that offers little analysis, but somehow suggests that we're a threat to our families, to the people who love us, to our children. These kinds of ideas are circulating not only amongst the white Americans that we see as racist, but also amongst many of our own people. And until we actually do the work to decolonize the way that we've actually approached and thought about Black men in total, there will always be some sort of negation in our rush to affirm people like George Floyd. Even in our, Tamir Rice was a child, but there's a hesitancy in what, well, maybe it was better because he didn't become a rapist or become a murderer. We see this with, the Terrence, I forgot his last name. For Harriet wrote an article about not marching for him. Eric Garner, like all these Black men who have been tried by public opinion after their murders to see if they were good people, if they're respectable enough for the Black community to march for. These conversations need to be aired out because we've been engaging Black men as if they're always guilty of some sort of violence or some sort of injury towards the Black community or the people around them. And it's time for us to have a real conversation about why our people have picked up this kinds of injurious language from white supremacists. We could track basically every stereotype, every negative belief we have about Black men to something that white people said prior. The notion that Black militancy was anti-woman, it was about brutalizing Black women and put them in that place. This comes from white feminists. The idea that Black men fundamentally abuse children and beat their women. This is coming from subculture violence theories, right? Like you can literally trace every negative racist stereotype about Black men that circulates today as the pinnacle of gender theory in the kind of decadent scholarship that was represented in the 1960s and 70s. So we have a lot of work to do to actually and genuinely affirm the life of Black men like Mr. George Floyd before we can say that we're truly marching for a brighter and more liberating day.
Thank you for that. And I have a request, Dr. Curry. You have done in-depth research and literally know what you're talking about and know where the bodies are buried and have discovered reference points and all kinds of facts to back up your perspective. It's my perspective that Black people are not conditioned generally to be decoders of white supremacist norms and anti-Black messaging and anti-Black male messaging. You mentioned earlier in your comments that some of the anti-Black male perspectives and impulses are internal to our community. Mm-hmm. And it's been my experience in several cases that when people have the veil or the white colored glasses, if you will, lifted from their lens, they're willing to see, particularly based on presentation. Mm-hmm. What I'm requesting of you now to give some accessible, connected dot, cause and effect examples of how white folks have turned everybody against Black people, including particularly Black men. Some things that make our people go, oh, okay, I fell for that. I'm caught up in that. I need to unlearn that.
Not a problem. Yeah. I think this kind of programming starts even when we're young children, right? One of the most glaring examples, I'm actually working with a colleague on a project, and he was at a family gathering and he was talking about a young Black boy who his family was constantly saying was bad, right? And, he took a moment to say, well, look, maybe this kid needs some love, needs some compassion. Maybe he needs someone to take a little extra time with him. What is it about him that makes you think that he's bad and not worth his taking time, right? These are the kinds of intuitive ideas, of just blanket reactions that we have to Black men and boys in life. Like when we see a Black man fail, we don't ever ask, well, what happened that caused him to be that way? We just think there's something about him being a Black man. And this is especially important when we try to think about the problems that we have amongst poor Black men in inner cities without certain kinds of resources, right? We see criminality because that's what they show us on the news. If you want to see somebody hurting somebody, well, you don't look at a Black man. But nobody takes a moment and stops and says, well, what are the conditions in life that allowed this person to become that way? And notice we do that for every other group. We have no problem stopping and saying, look, a white woman's acting out. Why is she killing her children? Oh, she must have been abused as a child. She killed her husband. Well, we know white women generally aren't like that. So something had to go wrong in her life. Same thing with white men. A white man does something, they still refer to him as a boy. He didn't know, he's still young. There's a presumption of innocence about every other group but Black men. So when Black men do something, it's really us fulfilling our nature. It's the bestiality in us that causes us to commit crimes or to commit rape or to abuse somebody. And what I'm trying to get people to understand is that if you give Black men the same benefit of the doubt, the same benefit of humanity that you give everyone else in the world, then what is it that makes you think that that's a part of their nature to do something malicious? And what we have not done, both as a community and in terms of being scholars and academics, we haven't pushed the pause button to see if our own biases are generating the frames we use to think about Black men and boys. Is this confirmation bias? So do we wait until something, and I think this is the case for a lot of activists and a lot of academics. Do you wait until a Black man somewhere in the world does something wrong so that you can create a career and talking point off of that one Black man? So never mind, I want to think about this. The negative stereotypes that people have of Black men as being violent, as being murderers and abusers, don't apply. It applies to less than 10,000 Black men in a given year. So the other millions of Black men in America, how do we explain their existence? What stories or narratives do we have to talk about the positivity that comes from our community, from these groups of Black men who achieve, who are good husbands, fathers, lovers, brothers, etc., who are good businessmen, who are activists in their community? We don't have any story to talk about them. And even though they're the majority, we still view them and we still depict them alongside the white media as if they're the exception.
And I want to do something for a moment and want Kashama and Duke to join us in a moment. But I want to do something that I always do because I think this is a very predominant source of anti-Black male impulses and imagination, and that's the media. There's a news show that just came out on ABC called For Life. Have you heard about it?
I have not.
Okay. For Life is apparently a popular show that comes on ABC, which takes place in prison. Mm-hmm. And it's about a Black man who's in prison, who's learning how to be an attorney in prison. And the nation's supposed to be enthused by the fact that he learned how to become an attorney, but they're not understanding that there's a problem with that having to happen in prison, mm-hmm. perpetuating the whole idea of Black men being incarcerated.
Exactly.
There's another show called Power.
Yeah, I've seen Power.
And Power implies that, being a drug dealer and chasing a white-looking Latina and not loving your own family and being irresponsible and having a wife that you neglect, etc. This is power. And the only person that attends to this Black man's son is his best white friend. Mm-hmm. There's full of negative messaging that recreates the lack of value for Black males. But it was a very popular show. People breaking their necks getting to their homes the nights it comes on. Then there's a show.
I've actually seen that. I've seen that show. Yes.
And a show called Empire, which I've only seen 2 episodes of that show, but I know it's centered around a musical family that got their business started through being drug dealers. Yeah. So people are enthusiastic about watching these shows. There's another show called This Is Us that stars or features a Black male and female couple, but the father figure was created by white saviors who are his adopted parents, and his real parents were on drugs. That's the metaphor. This is a very popular show. Right. And the majority of the people that I talk to about that show who love it because of the Black couple fixture did not allow themselves to remember the implications
The
of
origins of-
why
yeah.
why the black man is so wonderful. So I think it's important, again, so people can connect the dots. So next time they see an anti-black norm, hopefully they have a revelation and deflect or educate about what's being implied here.
Well, look, we accept so much negative messaging. I remember when Ishmael Reed was writing about The Wire, and constantly pushing back on the depiction of Baltimore and black communities in Baltimore as fundamentally drug infested and violent. And, we accept these stories because it seems that sometimes black people themselves believe that the only way that we become human is through the pathways of white people. There has to be some involvement, that our natural condition is wretched, it's impoverished, is drugged and deviant. And when we see ourselves on television able to participate in this white life, right? This life of white people that gives us social interaction, that validates us, that can make us attorneys or, et cetera. Like somehow this is valuable. And you have to think about this. I remember, my wife and I used to get into this argument about Scandal, right? And I asked her, I was like, look at Scandal. I was like, so it's a black woman who everybody's celebrating because she's a fixer. She's fixing all the white people's problems. I was like, but she's in an adulterous affair with a white man who kills everybody, right? She's sleeping with an FBI agent or undercover agent who worked for her father, who's a murderer, right? She slept with some guy who's in charge of, a dictator, right? So it's so funny to me because I say, listen, the stereotypes about black men are they're violent murderers. And every time we see them, we put them away, we lock them in jail, we say they're dangerous for society and humanity. Then you take a black woman, put her on a show where all she does is have sex with and deal with violent white murderers who have the power to launch bombs and start wars and, create assassinations, and everybody applauds it. And that's a problem with how we think of each other as black people, right? But the other part of it too is it tells you the difference of what you're really evaluating when you say you hate black men. You can't make me believe that you hate the black man that robs for money, robs for food, and is dangerous or on drugs, who's impoverished, right? Because you're fearful of them. But you have no problem celebrating white men who, for their livelihood and jobs, kill people who are undesirable in a society. It conditions us to accept this is what patriarchy really is, right? It's the power to decide and decide who lives and dies and who you want to let live. And when you put black men in that frame, you see that black men largely commit crimes because of deprivation, because they're in the same kind of poor environments, without food, without jobs, without money, that any other group of people in those environments do. So you look at poor white people, they commit crimes. You look at poor Latino people, they commit crimes. You look at poor people in the UK, they commit crimes. But somehow black men become exceptional. We don't become explained by our environment. We become explained because there's something in us that's fundamentally broken and deviant, right? There's something wrong with us. We're just not moral. And God forbid that somebody have a bad relationship or interaction with us. Don't let a black woman or another black man meet a black man they don't like. Oh, well, suddenly that's all black men. We justify self-hatred, right? These are the images and the kinds of narratives that we use or that we're being socialized into. And it's not just that we don't want to question it, right? It's that there's so many incentives around taking these narratives up in activism, in academic life, in professional life, right? There's so many incentives the white supremacist society gives you to keep pushing black men into the ground, literally as corpses, that no one wants to deal with the question of why is it that we see that the idea of success or being a good black person means that you have to condemn the nigger. And is this relationship, right, that exists in our communities, calling that little black boy who just needs some attention or maybe has never been shown any care in his life, a bad boy, right? Or telling black boys that they're not as academically gifted as their female counterparts, or the teachers not investing in black boys' academic life and pushing them off into sports or something else. These are the kinds of effects and consequences of what it means to dehumanize Black men and boys that receive no attention.
But Dr. Curry, supposedly, and I really do want you two other brothers to chime in, but I do have a comment before that is an attempt to be even more contemporary. Supposedly now, Dr. Curry, those days are over. Everybody loves George Floyd, and the world has changed because of George Floyd. And there's big posters all over the place with his face on it. His funeral got some national coverage, and the Black male has been discovered and is now humanized. You got members of Congress wearing kente cloth, and they named the plaza in Washington D.C. Black Lives Matter Plaza. And so maybe you tripping, and maybe you just speaking in the past.
Well, what I would say to that is, we've seen this kind of rehearsal every time a Black man or a Black boy is killed. We saw this with Michael Brown. We saw this with Eric Garner, right? We see the nation, go through these kind of rituals of mourning. But in my book, I actually talk about this, where I said that we have no problem celebrating the corpse of Black men. Our problem is when we have to live next to them, right?
Yeah.
So as when I was giving this talk I said something like, we love to perform outrage when Black men die, but we hesitate to show any care for them when they're alive.
Absolutely.
And to me, this is the celebration of a dead Black man. Nobody has to deal with Mr. Floyd ever again, right? Mr. Floyd becomes a memory. Mr. Floyd becomes a symbol of everyone else's political agendas. There are people who rant about Black men deserving to die and being trashed on Twitter, making their careers off of Mr. Floyd's death. There are white liberals who could care less about Black men, some of which have said in the Me Too era that Black men are the greatest threat, now marching for Mr. Floyd. This performance and ritual means absolutely nothing to how people engage, interpret, and penalize Black men in the world for their existence next to them. So this isn't going to stop. And I told somebody this the other day. I said, listen, you have a movement of Me Too that has disproportionately convicted and demonized Black men in the United States. Title IX cases on college campuses disproportionately affect Black men on those campuses. So what you're telling me is that the humanization, the kind of empathy that we see with Mr. Floyd is somehow going to change how white people engage and interact and change their daily relations. He's going to stop white people from thinking that Black men are rapists, criminals, and thieves. That's not the case, because we've been here. We know there's been 2,200. There's been over 2,000 Mr. Floyds in the United States over the last 6 years. 2,000. Think about that. Black men killed at the hands of the police are over 2,200 in this country. And we're talking about people celebrating the death of a Black man. We Black people are arguing, intersectionality feminists, right, are arguing about who's getting the most attention, completely ignoring the fact of what is required to kill somebody. There's no way that the celebrations we see in this moment reflect a genuine change in how Black men are viewed in this country. What it does represent is how everybody knows they can get paid off of a dead Black man's body. Because now white liberals, you put up your little Black Lives Matter banner. Oh, look, you're getting Black patriots, right? You put a square. Oh, look, election year, look, Biden, Black ladder. You got your moderate white liberals who hated Trump, but they're getting energized by the protests. What does this mean we need to do? Well, we need more Black people. So now the Black bourgeoisie and the Black academics come a running. They ready to support their candidate, more jobs in the academy. Right? Like this is what happens when Black men die.
Thanks, brother.
Right? The performance, right? The performance means that there are going to be people that are now going to be hired to talk about Black men. And I'm going to guarantee you that the people that's going to be hired to talk about Black men in most of these universities and in these, nonprofits are not going to be Black men. So we have to be very clear about what the cycles of abuse and exploitation that surround questions of death and dying for Black males in this country. I saw a CNN episode not too long ago where it was two black feminists who have written extensively about how black men were threats to women, how black men kill one of them was like, kill a black woman every 16 hours, right? But they're giving the commentaries on Mr. George Floyd. So CNN says, well, look, we have this huge problem, right? So suddenly the world's looking at data now, have this huge problem. Almost 300 black men, 200, 290, 250 black men are killed a year by cops. And the people you bring on to explore that topic aren't people that have affirmed black men's humanity. They're not people who research black men's lives or vulnerability. It's two black feminists that have historically condemned black men for the threats they pose to our society. See, this is what we have to start talking about.
Yeah.
This is what we have to start exposing, because what black men do is we endure, right? So we endure the insults, we endure the ridicule. Sometimes we internalize. We are so dehumanized that we will take the negative stereotypes that our own people, our women have of us, and then try to do better, as if we can't structurally do better than what we've been doing.
Yeah.
And then we use that as if it's a lifeline. So then what do? We join in the campaign. Oh, that's right. That's a bad nigga. Look at him. He believes that he's a man. No, I'm all about, black. I'm woke, right? I don't support masculinity, toxic masculinity, go down the list of things. We don't want to validate black life. Whatever he or she says goes. We don't want to be called a hotep. So we're not interested in black men loving women. We're not interested in black men loving other men, how their lives are doing, how their relationships are doing, what they mean to those communities. We're interested about whether or not we get recognition for not being associated with the group of black men the rest of the world despise. And that's a conversation we're not having.
Well, Kashama and Duke, you want to chime in with some concerns, perspectives?
Well, I'm glad. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned the capitalist aspect of George Floyd's murder, because it's oddly reminiscent of a lynching and all the souvenirs and cottage industries that came out of that. That's what we're seeing right now on the corporate level. There's a lot of opportunism happening as well. I also see a lot of preemptive, protection from black rage, what a lot of white people are trying to engage in. They see, like this George Floyd thing actually did, strike a nerve with black people for some reason. Because, and I say for some reason, because like you said, there's been over 2,000 death murders, of black people by cops. And this one kind of hit differently. Maybe it was the quarantine, maybe it was him screaming for his mother. I don't know what it was, but the world has taken note, and everybody's coming in with their own agendas. And I think the key thing is for us to stay focused. With you going into the area of toxic masculinity, there were some things I wanted to ask you in regards to Terry Crews specifically. But until we go deeper into that, that was you, brother? Oh, so you already there with me then. But before we go deeper into that, I was gonna see if Duke had anything to contribute or ask.
So for me, and it's probably just going to go in branching directions, so you pick wherever you want to start first. But for me, I want people, whoever watches this, to see how deep the rabbit hole goes when it comes to how black men are brutalized in the academic space. And some of the things you've already mentioned, but I wanted you to go in deeper about specifically one of them. But one of the things that I took note is that even when black men, even when there are theories created about black men, as far as like why they are a certain particular way and the situations that make them that way, the theorizers are not black men, and you made note of that in your book as well. And that's unique, because we're the only particular demographic that does not get to dictate how our demographic is discussed or seen. But in addition, I was hoping that you could really go in depth about this term intersectionality, because I know its original use. I know that it's not used in the way that it's intended. But from my experience and some of the things I've seen you post about as well, this is a term that's been used to erase Black male trials and traumas inside of this society. It's just that because you are a Black male, you don't have any other overlapping traumas in that's going on with what you experience in this world. And so if you could just speak about that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, should I start with Terry Crews first, or
wherever
that
take
brother, man? So Terry Crews was. I was laughing about the Terry Crews situation because one of the first things that happened is when Terry Crews was abused by Vinay. Me and Antonio Moore and I did a special talk about it to try to educate the world about the sexual vulnerability of Black men. So I think anyone who follows my research knows that I'm very much about looking at Black men beyond the corpse, right? That we have to understand Black men beyond just saying that they're killed by bullets and look at how they experience, live, and suffer in the world. And part of that suffering involves sexual violence and sexual vulnerability. So I'm very much an advocate of understanding why young Black boys have the earliest sexual debut of any groups, why young Black boys are sexually abused by men and women in our communities, etc. So when Terry Crews was a victim, Antonio Moore and I, did a special trying to educate the public about how often Black men are sexually abused and victims of this kind of coercive sexual violence. But one of the things that happened with Terry Crews is that he took his message, and I actually wrote an article about this. He took the message of, I'm a victim of sexual violence at the hands of a white man, and turned that into Black men are the boogeymen. So I actually argued with him on his Twitter page about this. He never responded to me. He responded to everybody else, but he wouldn't respond to me. And I told him, I was like, he at one point he was demanding Black men tell people their stories, right? That if you've really been abused and you're on my side, tell the world how you've been sexually abused. And I told him, I was like, you understand how reckless this is. I was like, you're not providing these men, if they share stories, with any kind of counseling services, trauma service, they can be ridiculed. This is not something where people just share stories of pain, especially when Black men have been conditioned throughout life that even when they do try to tell people they've been victims of sexual violence, that people listen to them. So then he goes into this kind of judgmental rant about how Black men are trash and toxic and X, Y, and Z. And at some point, I literally asked him, I was like, I don't understand something. I was like, you were abused by a white man. You were ignored by the Me Too movement until you start saying that Black men were bad men, that they were toxic, had toxic masculinity. I was like, the most of the abuses that happen to Black men in our community come from other women, caretakers, people who are in charge, et cetera, especially in terms of sexual debut. So I couldn't understand. And I told him, I was like, I don't understand, because this is not your experience, right? This is not the experience of the vast majority of Black men who are victims of sexual abuse. So I was like, who's paying you? Who's paying you to say that by you being victimized by a white man, you now have a platform in the Me Too movement to lecture Black men on toxic masculinity and their inadequacies about not talking about sexual abuse that happened to them? And you saw tons of white liberals clapping for Mr. Crews for lecturing all these bad Black men for not coming to grips with their own sexual vulnerability and abuse. You see all these Black feminists shagging on Mr. Crews, lecturing Black men about not being able to deal with their own, and I'm looking at this dynamic and I'm saying, well, how are you invested in the victim? The people supporting you who are Black are supporting you because they understand what it means to not be able to respond to that kind of abuse and violation for fear that you'll lose your career or even your life. But there was no sympathy from Mr. Crews on that point. He said that Black men were toxic because people like 50 Cent said, I would have kicked his ass. I would have beat him up. And people are lecturing Black men for wanting to have a violent response to somebody abusing them.
Right.
We would never tell a woman who was a victim of sexual abuse or rape that she was violent because she wanted to attack her or assault her. No one would say that anyone responding with violence for raping or sexually molesting them was somehow a bad person for defending their own body. But somehow when it comes to Black men saying that they would have lost their career, their livelihood, etc., to not be violated becomes, oh, I told you, Black men are violent. And Cruz co-signed on this. And this is the problem. Cruz co-signed on this. So at the same moment that you get Black men talking about their experience and how they would have responded, even if Cruz disagrees with the response, the issue is how do you have a platform using Me Too rhetoric and liberal feminism to come on and blame Black men for how they will react to sexual violence when they're one of the most sexually violated groups in the United States, right? This is what I mean about the gaps that we have and how we think about the positions that Black men and boys are actually in. We pay no attention to them being victims of sexual violence in this country.
Dr. Kerr, I think it's important also, along with the powerful things you're deconstructing, is to look at and have our audience look at that people like Terry Crews are people who are purposely given gravitas in the media context.
Oh, absolutely.
Like for example, you are a, pardon my community terminology, but you are a PhD scholar. If they're gonna call anybody, y'all too young, y'all know about that. But anyway, PhD, PYO-D, pure. Anyway, he's a pure scholar. And if they're gonna call anybody to talk about these issues that men address, they should be calling the likes of him. It's not that he's not qualified to talk about these issues. So the point I'm trying to make is that people like Terry Crews and Candace Williams, and there's so many of them, these people are put in the front of us and become household words because of white supremacist agendas to compromise Black logic and Black critical thinking. And even though we mentioned Terry Crews' name a lot, Terry Crews has been identified among whiteness as a vulnerable, screwed up, white supremacy invested Black person that we need to make a star out of or make iconic to keep Black people in confusion. Because we forget that part. We think when we see grown up Black people someplace doing stuff, that's a grown up person making a bunch of decisions. But no, that grown up person gets incentivized, attention that they otherwise would not get because they're willing to do exactly what they do. So it's important to bring that in there because we keep
that's absolutely true.
People talk about free will, and it's another terminology that you and I talked about in one of the last show that we were on that I think is something to consider in terms of another way of describing it, the word acceptance. Remember we talked about that? And I mentioned to you that I don't think it's an issue of acceptance because acceptance sounds intentional and does not have the same energy as being hypnotized and brainwashed.
Right.
Because to be brainwashed, you are not in the position anymore to do any kind of actual accepting because you don't even know that you're in a white supremacist soup or that your water is and the air is white supremacy. It's a normal part of the backdrop that you're taught not only not to critique, but to think you're bad for critiquing, that you're being racist for raising issues of white supremacy.
Yes.
So
that's how institutionalized it is.
None of that is accepted. Just like speaking English, it's not accepted, it's conditioned.
Absolutely.
And I think people could possibly come out of what I call the white supremacy trauma trance if they realize they're being played. Because a lot of us don't think we're being played. We're mad at Terry, what's his name? Terry Crews. But Terry Crews is not some genius intellect, social scientist, political or behavioral scientist with the experience and training to talk about issues that's relevant to Black behavior. You are, I am, but they're not gonna call us, and I'm not mad. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm just getting this look at the dichotomy that we have.
Black it's important,
who can talk about these things, but are purposely avoided so the white supremacy rampage can continue in our behavior.
It was Malcolm X. I just wanted to add on that it was Malcolm X.
That's a little housekeeping thing. I got a message from Anthony saying he needs to be brought back in.
Okay, well, Adam was.
No,
Adam,
I'm in.
he's
Okay,
in.
okay, great.
I just wanted to add that it was Malcolm X who said, and I don't have the clip with me on hand, but he said that we are the only group that our entertainers in Hollywood, and Cleo, you added our pastors, are considered to be the spokespersons for the entire race, as opposed to actual scholars when it comes to issues on heavy political issues or anything that actually affects the community. And he said that was so stupid. And he said it was racist that white people continuously look for our football players, our basketball players, whoever, in order to talk about the intricacies of what we deal with as a people. And I just want to bring that to the light.
No, but I mean, it's very relevant. It's very true, right? I mean, Mr. Cruz's position was one where his story became relevant when he took up the language of Me Too.
Yep.
But black men are not sexually victimized in a way that could be explained by how you think of mostly middle class white women being sexually coerced. I mean, you have to remember most of the violence that happens to black people is never recognized or attended to in this society, right? And that goes for our men and our women.
Yeah.
Right, when you're looking, most of the violence that happens, domestic abuse, child abuse, this happens in poor, socioeconomically deprived areas, right? It follows the same trend of practically every other kind of family conflict study that's been done in the last 30 years. So they don't care about those people, but they care about these white women who had transactional sex in some cases to advance their careers, and they're now millionaires, creating hashtags about how they were coerced and got paid off in a certain way that black women and poor black women and black men have absolutely no access to. Black boys are being raped in jail. Black boys are being sexually abused by staffers in juvie. Black boys are being molested by caretakers because their mother and father has to work 2 or 3 jobs, right? This is the situation that many people in our community are. That's not a hashtag type of issue. That's not about recognize that I was a victim of sexual harassment. That's I'm being put in situations and environments where because I'm poor, because I'm young, because I'm alone and abandoned, people can take advantage of me for their own will and uses. In some cases, people who are agents of the state use sexual violence to groom me into certain kind of positions they have in those institutions. And we keep pretending that this doesn't happen, that this is not happening, while at the same time trying to condemn these black men for not wanting to speak about what the world said that they're going to be silent about in the first place. And this is the problem I have with Mr. Cruz and the notion of toxic masculinity. He adopted a white feminist term, right? Because toxic masculinity isn't really a term that exists. It's how Americans brought over the idea of hegemonic masculinity. So hegemonic masculinity was the idea that men don't have to rule by force. That because men rule everything in a society, they control the media, the economy, the work, all this, so they can rule through ideology. They can trick you into thinking exactly what we're talking about. They can trick you into thinking what they want you to think so they don't have to ever do it under the force of a gun. And this was developed in Australia. So when it came over to the United States, white feminists start picking up the term and using it to describe any kind of violent or negative behavior. People like Connell, the originator of the term, has done tons of articles saying that this is not what it means. This is not how I want to use it. But nonetheless, that's what it means in the United States. So you're taking this idea of violence and you're marrying it to black men. So when you're not talking about black men who own media stations. You're not talking about black men who control newspaper outlets. You're not talking about black men who own property that get to decide who lives in what segregated areas. Toxic masculinity is a code word for violence. And because you already think that black men are violent, that's why the highlight on Mr. Cruz's intervention about sexual assault was whether or not he used violence. And then every other black man who was going to use violence, well, those are the bad, toxic black men, right? I think that Mr. Cruz represents a certain view of white liberalism that again tries to distance black people from themselves. You put up a Mr. Terry Crews, he's not knowledgeable about the things that he speaks about. Successful actor in his own right. I'm not criticizing his career, but I'm saying that for him to be a spokesperson on issues of race and racism, when he's kind of pulled out to talk in front of these, like the Women's World Congress and talk about how patriarchy is a cult and how, men treat women like slaves to white women who actually own Black people as slaves, it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense but they're happy to have that conversation, right? In terms of Mr. Porter, in terms of the question on intersectionality, it's kind of it's like, how much time do you have? Look. I mean, I want to be crystal clear on this point. Intersectionality was developed as a way to talk about, at least through Crenshaw's view in the 1980s, as a way to talk about how she thought Black women were being excluded from white feminism, from anti-racist activism. The problem is that when Crenshaw developed her theory, and for those people who always like, who want to check this, if you look at her article, Mapping the Margins, on page 1266, she has a footnote where she talks about feminists have already done the work to show that Black men use rape and sexual violence to dominate Black women in the Black community. So part of intersectionality, we can have the argument if it's just over intersecting categories or whatnot. Part of the argument is that Black men as male have privilege in a patriarchal society because they can utilize sexual violence to keep women in their place. And this idea, right? This idea is so important because if you look at who she's quoting two white women, right? Karen Holmes and Joyce Williams. They wrote a book called The Second Assault. And that book actually argues that Black men are more likely to believe that it's okay to rape women than white men. Now, these two white feminists from Texas were actually influenced by a racist white criminologist named Lynn A. Curtis. Lynn A. Curtis believed, he was actually the first person to use intersectionality in the way that Crenshaw's using it. Lynn A. Curtis believed that when you're talking about poor Black people, these subcultures of violence, that what you're actually talking about is violence that's not caused by the whole Black race, but the Black men of the race. So what Lynn A. Curtis did was say, look, we can develop a contracultural theory that says that locates sexual violence and rape in Black men's pathological nature. And he actually wants Black women to be innocent in this frame. He's like, no, this isn't Black women's fault. This is Black men's fault. And these white feminists jumped on this idea in the 1980s and said, look, we can take Black men and make them the rapists. So look, the debate was not about were Black men rapists to white women. The debate became, were Black men rapists of Black women? And in that book, The Second Assault, the introduction talks about how white men taught Black men to hate Black women through the act of rape. So when you read all these intersectional analyses today, and Black men are if you read Frank Rudy Cooper's work, for instance, on bipolar masculinity, he says, well, Black men take pleasure in abusing and dominating other people in their own group. That idea comes from these racist sociological theories that told the world that Black men use sexual violence to keep other groups of women or other Black people in line. And this is what's so dangerous.
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
And Adam, at some point soon, we're going to open this up to the audience and put the link on the page so people can get in if they want to get in. I've been, at the risk of sounding facetious, I don't really intend to. I've been a Black man, for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've noticed is that when Black men start talking, particularly dark-skinned Black men, start talking, regardless of their intellect or capacity to express an issue, people shut down.
Of course.
They don't even hear. I mean, I've been to meetings before where I was actually crying because there was something occurring that was breaking my heart, and I was being so stereotyped and physically evaluated as this potential angry, dangerous person. People couldn't even see or acknowledge or take seriously that I was actually crying.
Right.
They couldn't even value that tears because I'm
They
a
have no
full-fledged,
sympathy or empathy with you. Yeah.
right. I'm a full-fledged human being. You know, we made of the same thing everybody else is made of in terms of guts and tears and tear ducts and
Mm-hmm.
you know, heart and the same thing. I mean, there's no extra hate bone nowhere in me or whatever. But my point is that, or my question to you is, how do you suggest? Well, I want people to remember to realize that this occurs first of all. So I want to make sure people are hearing that phenomenon occurs. And how do you and how have you dealt with that potential? Because, for example, and this may not be relevant, but maybe it is. You can let us know. You're all the way in Europe right now.
Mm-hmm.
You are in Texas, I believe.
Yes.
And you were here, and you were working in the university, and basically introducing your craft and educating people based on your craft and your knowledge right in this country. But when you had the nerves to focus on Black men,
right,
as an academic focus, there was resistance, and
absolutely,
you wanted to breathe fully and actually with integrity do what you believe was important from an academic perspective, and had to leave the country to do that. Talk about ignoring and marginalizing a brother regardless of his capability. I know that one of your ways of dealing with it from a professional and academic perspective was to leave and go someplace to breathe.
Right,
but how do you deal with it otherwise, given all that you know, and all that you've proven, and all you've documented, and all of your scholarly work, when people look at you and shut down?
I've had to become increasingly more comfortable with being hated. When I started talking about Black men, I did so from, as you said, from the position of a scholar. For me, it was an academic research focus, but I found exactly what you said happening. Cleo, I would be in presentations with data charts, right? Like actually copying like NISVS data sheets so that people couldn't run away from the fact of what was happening to Black men and boys, and people would just ignore it. I read paper after paper, all of which got published, just documenting. And I would never, I can tell you in 10 years doing this work, I've had 2 people ask me questions about what I've actually said in any of my research. They don't hear us. They're not trying to hear it. So your experience rings very true to me, right? No matter what I say, I could put all the studies I put at the beginning of The Man Not about how progressive Black men were, right? And how they were no more homophobic or more sexist than any other group of people, even their own women, right? Nobody cares. The stereotype about Black men not being human did so much work. And that's what I said. Like, I had to start accepting the idea that no matter how many awards I win, no matter how well my book does, I have to deal with white and Black people in the academy that are gonna hate me simply because I defend the humanity of Black men. And when it was, and here's the interesting thing that happened. When I was in the United States, I would interview for some really prestigious positions, miss it but come in second. Some positions I would interview for was just a charade. I knew I was at one interview at a small little town in Kentucky, or a little liberal arts school there. And the vice chancellor of diversity asked me if I believed that Black men were violent and a danger to women and children. And aren't Black households better off? Now, this is verbatim. Aren't Black households better off with Black men not being in them than being in them? And when I said no. I was like, this is absolutely ridiculous. I laid down all the data. I was like, look, clearly you don't know what my research is. It was evident after that conversation I wasn't getting the job. But the point was that I was put in a position on a job interview to identify Black men as being pathological and violent as the basis for whether or not I was a safe Black man that could get the job. These kinds of negotiations and negations of Black men happen every day in the academy. It happens even now. I mean, even now and I'll be very clear, because on Twitter sometimes I think a lot of the people that support me accidentally spill over to the kind of like sensationalist story that, oh, he was so radical that he had to leave America, right? And I was a full professor at Texas A&M. I could have stayed there. I didn't enjoy Texas A&M at all because of the racism and conservatism there. but I got a better job in Europe where people were genuinely interested in what I had to say about Black men and boys. So I was confronted with a situation. Do I keep fighting against racist white people and Black people who don't want to have a real academic based, research focused conversation on Black men and boys? Or do I go to a more prestigious university in Europe as a chair or a distinguished professor and build a research program that could actually affect the types of things I want to do with Black men and boys around the world? And I picked Europe because in the United States, I find that the default position is, as you exactly say, no matter what a Black man tells us he is, we decide what a Black man is. And it's that problem, that location of Black men within the abyss of negativity and hatred that we have even amongst Black academics, that made me say it's not worth engaging. It's not worth it to spend a whole life talking to people with facts. Like there are people, brother, there are people who have told me that my book sucks, that have never read my book. Like just front off attack. Oh, the scholarship's garbage. All kind of, they constantly call us trash. Oh, you're trash. Your Hotep X, Y, and Z. They're like, you hate gay Black men. I was like, I have a whole section. All my work speaks to gay Black men. I was, like, it's just accusation after accusation. And then when I took time to think about it, the accusations they had of me as being anti-woman, homosexual, Hotep, etc., are just what they generally say about all Black men anyway. It's nothing new. It's not like, oh, you said X and this is why we believe it. You're not the good Black man that lectures to other Black men about their failing. So we're gonna call you these names. We can't prove it.
What's ironic? What's ironic about this to me, getting back to contemporary times. Let me say this first. Adam, put the link on the pages and alert people that they're invited to join the conversation by video if they like.
We have a question in the chat as well, Cleo.
Okay, cool. Now, so I want to get to that. So I'll be quick. What's ironic about what's happening now is that proof of how people feel about Black men or Black males was clear in how George Floyd was murdered. Because he wasn't murdered with great drama. The guy had his hand in his pocket, was chilling.
Absolutely.
Relaxed. Now, I haven't seen the video. I'm going by what people have told me over and over again, including on talk shows about what occurred. I'm not going to watch it because I might go kill somebody. So I haven't watched it because I'm tired of this. But anyway, I'm told that the dude was leaning in on his neck and had his hand in his pocket, just chilling, chewing his gum, wasn't even moved. And that's how people treat Black people in this country. Not even moved, not even seeing their tears, not seeing their humanity.
Absolutely.
The crap about Tamir Rice being murdered, well, he didn't look 12. Tamir Rice looked like a little baby.
Yes.
He looked like he was grown. I mean, those are all crazy excuses. And it's interesting, this performance, which is exactly what it is from my perspective of this care, in the wake of picture proof of how everybody treats Black men. Right. And now people gonna get paid, like you said. There's gonna be experts who are not gonna be Black men like yourself, who knows what you're talking about and who has done in-depth laser beam focused research. And I just want to understand that we're getting ready to be played, all of this caring about Black men without having an analysis that breaks down what Dr. Curry talks about, which he's proven in his book and in his conversations. If none of this stuff is part of how the conversation is going in terms of what Black men actually go through, and the institutional barriers to Black humanity is not part of how we, quote, resolve this, I'm gonna use a word that ain't that scholarly. It's bullshit.
Another thing, Cleo and Dr. Curry, you mentioned about like the whole thing of people in our narrative who are not Black men. But one thing that I noticed after George Floyd's death and the protests is that Black men have to also jump through all these hoops and legitimize ourselves and prove that we have a right to even protest for George Floyd. Because I keep seeing this narrative like, intracommunal murder or crime in the Black community must have to be like at 0% in order for us to legitimately say cops can't keep killing us. Or relationships within the community between heterosexual and homosexual people have to be picture perfect in order
Right.
for Black people, and particularly Black men, to deserve to be able to say, hey, we want to overturn our oppression. We want to overthrow our oppression.
This, brother, I completely, I could play. We talked about this a little bit on the last show we're on. Because when you look at the data, it's like I keep telling people, nobody comes out clean when you look at data, because everybody in the same position commit the same kind of crimes. So if you take poor Black men, do they commit disproportionately high rates of domestic violence? Absolutely. You take poor Black women in those same communities, do they commit disproportionately high acts of domestic violence? Absolutely. Do they abuse their children? Absolutely. Do same-sex couples in those communities abuse each other? Hell yes. Some of the most violent intimate partner relationships, intimate terrorism rates that we have, according to CDC, come from lesbian couples. Is it right? Like, but nobody focuses on that, because that would be homophobic. If you focus on a minority to talk about the dynamics of the larger group, that's a stereotype. And we know that fails, right? But you take Black men, you take a population where less than 1% of them are actually rapists. Where actually less than 10% of them are incarcerated, right? You take any of these, and that's talking to the rest of the 99%. Somehow that's good gender theory. Somehow that's intersectional analysis. Somehow that's a legitimate claim that I can be evaluated by people. So a Black man pissed you off, or a Black man hurt you, so I'm culpable? Because now your interpersonal relationships are a structural and epistemological problem. It's not about you picked the wrong guy, or this guy was a bad person. This is about, well, Tommy, you have the same kind of Black masculinity that this Black man who hurt me did, so all of you Black men are a problem. But you don't say that about Karens and Beckys. We can show that Karen and Becky been raping and lynching and colonizing people since the mid 1800s. But every Karen and Becky's a new Karen and Becky. We discover her for the first time.
That's right.
Every time we see a Karen or a Becky, we're somehow surprised that white women are racist. That they, even though they had Klan organizations, even though they systematically raped Black men throughout history, we're surprised by it. That they consistently vote for conservative parties, but somehow we still theorize them as if they're liberal. They act like white women voting for Trump was the first time they voted for a Republican that was against Black rights. But Black men, see, that's what gets me. Black men, though, who've historically voted Democratic, who have historically supported the liberalization of women's rights, of childcare rights, workers' rights, etc. These people are the monsters, right? This is a setup. I'm trying to, I hate to say it that way, but this is a setup, because you can't have all this empirical evidence, much of which is conducted by Black feminists in the social sciences, or even white feminists in the social sciences, right? And these white women historians documenting how white women have used history of power and gender to their own advantages, and then come back and still somehow get to an analysis that blames Black men for every ill and crime that we have in the Black community. These people are pimping the super predator myth in the academy for their own benefit. And we have to be crystal clear about this, right? Because every time we try to have a conversation about it, what we end up saying is like, oh, well, Black men can't be mad because Black men can't be mad what happened to George Floyd because they're killing Black women. Black men can't be mad because they're killing children. And you say, well, how do you explain these numbers coming from the FBI, the UCR data, where Black women are killing people, where Black women are abusing children? Oh, it's because their environment. They had a bad childhood, but they live in the same neighborhoods. These Black men didn't have bad childhoods. You see, the difference is that whereas we give humanity, right, to white people and to a Black female counterpart regarding the act of violence, we take it away with Black men because we assume that their humanity is all about that violence.
Yeah.
And we have to start putting attention on how this criminalization, this sleight of hand, is actually framing the way that our protests are being conducted, the media is taking on this story, and more threatening how our academics propagate this kind of nonsense.
Thank you, Dr. Curry. We have a guest who some of us know named Mr. Roger Williams, who apparently has some type of contribution to our discussion, and we want to let him express whatever that is he wants to bring.
What's up, Roger?
Hey,
How you
everyone.
doing, Mr. Williams?
Mr. Williams.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. And Dr. Curry, it is beyond a pleasure to finally interact with you in live. I've interacted with you
Thank you,
very
sir.
briefly on Twitter, so it's very good to see you here, and you're welcome. And thank you again, and thanks everyone for doing this. This is historic for me, and I'm currently reading your book, and I'm deeply touched by what it's saying, because I think it's giving voice now to a lot of Black men who felt pushed aside and left out of this broader conversation. Yes, yes, Duke, I'm reading it right now. And I have a question for something that came up in, I think it was chapter 1, and you touched on it in your introduction. And so when I became quote unquote woke, and one of the things that I recognized in the Black community is that we have internalized a lot of quote unquote bad things from Europeanism and from being exposed to European violence. But then in your book, you talked about Black mimesis or mimetics, which is essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, where whatever happens with Black men, it's just us trying to mimic whiteness or white maleness.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, would you say that the Black mimesis or Black mimetics idea runs counter to the notion that we are in fact suffering from internalized evil, frankly, from the white European ways of seeing the world? Does that run counter to your notion of Black mimetics?
No. It works hand in hand, actually. The idea that Black men want to be white men is a very old colonial idea. So back in the early 20th century, the idea was that when white people would colonize, and this tells you how sick white people are, that when white people colonized Native people, they became their fathers. And because Native people were childlike, the father-child relationship meant that they developed a dependency complex. So that's why they wanted to imitate them. What I argue with the mimesis in Black mimesis and the mimetic theory is that gender theory, so the theories that we think of as intersectional, as feminist, basically take on that colonial view. It says that, look, Black men are broken and they don't have any self-concept where they can actually resist white supremacy. So they just want to be white men. So when and through the book, later you'll see I talk about anti-Black misandry and even mimesis as a process of internalized racism, right? So the idea is, are there some Black men who buy into those ideas? Absolutely, right? Absolutely. But as a culture, do Black men have a resistance to the notion of white masculinity? Without a doubt. So when you look at why Black men don't use masculinity but talk about manhood, when you ask, well, why are Black men more spiritual? Why do they have higher forms of communality? Why do they not care about being breadwinners? How do they redefine the father role and the husband role? All that's Black manhood doing that work, right? Because that's us having a different value system.
Yep.
And what I'm pointing out to these people who demonize us is to say, look, you theorize us as if we have no personhood, no cultural resistance as being Black men that allow us to create positive values in the world. You think we're just an imitation of our oppressor. So then I asked the really difficult question. Well, if you think that we're imitating white manhood, are you imitating white womanhood? Is there a stake in you calling Black men rapists to be treated like a white woman? Do you want the vulnerability of a white woman as the basis of your notions of female liberation? Maybe that says something about why all these feminists are on Twitter complaining about Black men don't protect them. You understand protection is patriarchy. It's paternalism, right? You see, these contradictions, right, are what I'm saying is that, oh, you want to tell Black men they aspire, right? They aspire to be white men, but you don't see how those same notions of racism create the expectation that men should be your primary protectors, or that men should take care of you, or that you should get paid, right? But if you're dating a man, you should have to pay for these. These all come from the same thing. All I'm trying to say is the flaw of gender theory is it's only colonial, right? It only takes up this dependency complex without recognizing that Black men have other values, systems, and actual behaviors that create a completely different notion of masculinity and manhood altogether.
I wanted to share a snippet, if there's time.
There's time.
So as a poet, after coming into work with Cleo Monago and after coming across your work, I had made the intention to really start uplifting my voice as a Black male and really talking about that experience specifically. And so there's a snippet here in the poem, and I just want to share. It says, Black men are labeled dangerous and yet at the same time in danger. Both fetishized and feared, they say that Black boy, Black man, always strong, then how come he always died? With people watching, and his kin is shook, and the apple never falls far from his dangling foot. 2018, and Black men are still getting lynched, still getting beat down, still being falsely arrested. Cops on tape planting guns near our corpses. It's funny how Black men's death can win a poetry slam, but not a court case. And I'm paraphrasing Cleo Monago here, but he says that everyone hates Black men until it's about 9 p.m. on a Thursday evening. And yeah. I know that to be true in my life. I also recognize that in the many conversations that I've had with Black men, regardless of sexuality, but most of them heterosexual, they never even knew that they had the capacity or space to think of themselves as a full human being, right? Yeah. Like there's discussions online where Black men will say, never vent to your girl. And then the women are on there like, oh, that's sexist and blah, blah, blah. But the men start telling their stories and it's like, you don't do this because you become a victim when you do. Like they hold this against you, your vulnerability against you. And when Black men are talking about this, they're still shut down and dismissed. I know Absolutely. A popular homosexual Black man who tried to have a discussion on Black males being victims of sexual violence. And it had got shut down. And mind you, this person who curated this post is one of those people who's ultimately always talking about how Black men are the most violent, the most evil parts of our community, blah, blah, blah. But he tried to curate this post. And what he found out was that there was absolutely no one who was interested in offering sympathy and empathy for these particular Black males. And so he had made an apology post right afterwards, but we're not dealing with what society has created, as you put in the book, the genre of a Black man. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about how you came to that particular term. I know you go in the book, but for people that don't know, that would be awesome.
And Dr. Curry, before you do that, do the abbreviated version, because there's other people who are waiting.
Absolutely. Yeah. So really quickly, listen, the history of gender in this country is completely dishonest. What we've learned in school is not really the truth. Gender was a term that really tried to capture the interaction that Black men posed free Black men posed in the 19th century to white women. And in the 20th century, white women created the idea that they were an oppressed minority by looking at how Black men and Jewish people, Black people and Jewish people, specifically Black men and Jewish men, were treated under segregation in the Holocaust, right? So, the Black Power movement, the Black Arts movement, were trying to reconfigure what manhood was. And Sylvia Wynter writes this essay where she's talking about the work of the Black Power movement and how it tried to reconfigure and deconstruct Western notions of manhood, womanhood, and gender. And she termed that genre. So kind of tracing the lineage from Huey P. Newton to Sylvia Wynter, I used genre to talk about this kind of malleable type of being that Black men have, where we're just fungible to the wills of practically everyone else in the world but our own. And I think it's so important because, when you deal with issues of sexual violence and not just death, you really do see that people have the ability to make Black male flesh whatever they want. If you take a straight Black man and rape him by, a cop rapes him with a baton, a screwdriver, or his own penis, the Black man doesn't have a sexual orientation to the cop he's trying to respect. He's what the cop wants him to be, right? You take homosexual Black men in this country, and they still view them as rapists of women, right? Like these conflicts constantly contradict our own self-proclamations about who and what we are. But we don't ever analyze ourselves as being imposed upon from an outside world. We're always studied as if we're just the accumulation of bad choices. So a Black man robs somebody, he made a bad choice. But you overlook that Black men in that city or that town can't get any work, even when they have college degrees. right? You talk about a black man, he chose to rape or beat her, but you completely overlook that he's been abused as a child since he was 4 or 5, right? Like these are the types of things that I'm trying to capture. And I don't think the notion of gender, as we see it play out even in Black Lives Matter, accurately depicts the experiences of black men. Because now we're fighting about who gets the most media attention. Black men die the most, but we can't talk about it. They're not victims.
Dr. Curry, people are asking over and over again about the name of your book again and where they can get it.
So the name of my book is The Man Not. There, I appreciate it, George. It's The Man Not, Race, Class, Genre, and the Dilemmas of Black Manhood. You can get it on Amazon. It ships out pretty quickly. I think they're still in stock. You can order it from Temple University Press. At this point, I think you can pretty much Google it, and I mean, I think everywhere. I think Walmart is selling them now. So, it's pretty much available.
Local bookstore here in Baltimore. I don't know if there's any more copies left, but Red Ember's bookstore had it here in Baltimore. If anyone that's following in Baltimore.
Fantastic. And I got
I'm sure everyone's place should have it. If they don't, we definitely need to let them know to start getting it. Everyone's place is one of the oldest and most popular Black bookstores in Baltimore.
Okay.
All right.
I wanted just to thank everybody for supporting the book, though, because I really do want to convey to you, you have no idea how difficult it is in the university to write something that goes against everything people believes and still be held in high regard. So I appreciate the support.
Well, we appreciate you, your existence, and your scholarly works.
Thank you.
There's someone named Dante. We can't see them, but we see their name. Who has
Dante Wilkins?
Dante, are you there? Okay, well, if Dante comes back, we'll welcome him. Have you heard of the film Antoine Fisher?
Yes.
Have the rest of you here heard about that?
I've actually read the book, Finding Fish. Yes.
I mentioned that film because it's one of the rare films that comprehensively shows how to traumatize a Black child and what the consequence can look like when they become an adult.
There
And Antoine Fisher is autobiographical, and he was involved. He makes films, and he was involved in the making of this film. And there are several powerful moments, but one moment is when his adopted mother tied him to a pole and beat him and called him a word I do not use. I'm using it for the sake of this show. Called him a nigger while he was beating him, and she basically nicknamed him nigger. That's what she called him all the time. And he also was sexually abused by a woman, which they rarely, as a matter of fact, I had not seen that before in a film depicted as well as this was depicted, because the phenomena, and it's one that you often talk about, Dr. Curry, it's ignored and put under the rug. Yeah. So I'm inviting people to look at Antoine Fisher, this autobiographical film, and see an example of what a lot of Black boys go through and how that's marginalized instead of looking at what happens with Black men, and Black men are dehumanized, ironically, and made into beast, which is one of the agendas of white supremacy mythology, to make us disposable. The goal is that we are disposable, because the more of us are disposed, the less of a threat there is to white male power. And the magic that we bring, and that Black people, regardless of gender, bring, is a threat as well, and creates the possibility of mediocrity, mass mediocrity, in contrast among white people, which they resent, and that's why some of us get killed and murdered too. And I think it's important to understand Black magic, Black beauty, Black capacity, Black magnificence. I'm not saying everybody's magnificent. I'm saying that we are a major source of natural resources in human form and in mineral form and geographically. And the tax on us is not because we're bad people. The tax on us is that we're so powerful, we must be controlled.
Absolutely. We
must be controlled by all means, and we must turn reality upside down. We must create the myth of white folks who don't even exist at the top of a totem pole, and put Black people who really don't exist in terms of us calling ourselves Black A lot of people of African descent in the United States don't even realize that most Africans do not call themselves Black, not unless they're copying off of other colonized people and colonizers. They call themselves Africans or whatever community they're from a cultural, spiritual perspective. And a lot of us don't know that. A lot of us have a white supremacist worldview and don't realize that we're in a philosophical, political prison. It's kind of like, you probably met people before whose house stink, but they don't know until they go outside and go back in and go, damn. Well, that's what we live in. We live in a stinky house that we've never been out of. So we don't realize how wretched the smell is. So we just revel in it until we leave. And I've left. And a number of us have left. And Curry is all the way somewhere else, even though there's some smells over there too. But we won't get into that. It's a more tolerable smell where he is because of the consequences. But Kashama, you trying to say something? And there's also people
two things in the Facebook chat. First of all, Dante says that he was having some tech problems, but he's in the Facebook chat. So I think he's gonna go ahead and ask a question. But we also have a question from don't do this to me. Okay. We also have a question. I gotta go to touch screen. Okay. From DeLeo. This brother says, can you speak, this to you, Dr. Curry, can you speak to the phenomenon of white people calling particularly Black men angry in work environment when a Black person speaks up for any situation, whether it's personal or work-related topic that they're speaking about? How do you respond to white people calling you angry?
So I'll tell you what the research says, and I'll tell you how I respond to it. So the research people by like Robert Livingston shows that any Black man, even in CEO environments, that has any kind of agency or agentic personality, meaning if you're intelligent, if you're confident, if you're knowledgeable, if you're, any of these things are perceived as threats in the white mind, right? Because for Black men to be in a space, right, even their names can cause white people anxiety. This is how serious it is in our culture. Okay, so you have to kind of understand that. Most employers see Black men as lacking soft skills. So the notion that Black men are angry kind of comes up with the idea that Black men are not very approachable. They're not very interpersonal. You have to keep their distance. They have to keep their distance away from you. And I've been called angry constantly. Look, people, it's funny because in my field of philosophy, there are groups of Black people and certain groups of Black feminists who constantly yell and call out people like in popular call out culture, right? So somebody will give a paper, they'll get up and yell at them, etc. And these people are never called angry. I'm called angry if I say, like, speak how I'm speaking now, and somebody questions me, and I say, well, look, that's just not right for this, and this reason, right? So I'm angry, I'm aggressive, I'm always looking for a fight. Listen, you have to get used to this stuff because it's never going to change, right? And I remember when I first started as a professor, I was so frustrated because I was like, well, what do I have to do to not be perceived as a threat, right? I mean, like, I remember I'll tell you, I went to one job interview. And this tells you how serious it was. I went to one job interview like 2012, 2013, and I was playing a lot of tennis. I was lifting, so I was much bigger. I was much bigger, but I was reading all this data, so I wanted to, I was having a video interview, so I put on a purple shirt. I wore bright colors, right, to try to disarm the committee.
You didn't get a weave? How come you didn't get a weave?
I should have got a weave, right? You should have put on a dress. But
that's how you do it.
The thing was, I'm kind of talking about Richard Wright there, brother who had to put on a dress in 8 Men. But the thing is that even with me just talking over a video interview, white women at the university said they felt as if I was threatening and dangerous. And when I got the on campus, I didn't end up getting the position. But when I got to the on campus, they had already told me. They kind of already told me that they had this huge reaction because they never interviewed a Black person on campus before, and how many white people were afraid. You're not going to get out of that stereotype. The thing I think what Black men have to do is we have to stop giving it power as if it's something wrong with us. That's the first thing. This is not our problem. This is the problem in the world. The second thing is that Black men have to start developing positive coping mechanisms to start dealing with and socially supporting each other. Because what often happens is that the negative stereotypes about Black men get talked about as if they're just racism, and they're not. They're a particularly virulent form of anti-Black misandry, because the idea that Black men are rapists or abusers, these are not just, this is not a racist trope, this is a racist Black male trope, right? Because the understanding that we have of Black men as being angry, dangerous, and deviant is largely associated with what we think their bodies can do. Right?
Can you quickly define misandry real quick? Could you quickly just define that? Because that's a new term for people who have been feminists to death.
Yes, yes. So I know there's a popular conception, and this is, when I started off saying intersectionality and feminism just doesn't work for how we study Black men. There's a popular conception that patriarchy is a society where all men dominate all women, right? And this is largely a lie that was invented in the 1970s. There was never this idea before radical feminists in the 1970s that all men dominate all group of women, because you have to remember, most of the white women that are in the world were introduced to other groups of racialized men as their colonizers or owners, right? So there's no way that all men have historically dominated all women. What anti-Black misandry is trying to capture is the ways that in white supremacist and patriarchal societies, groups of lesser men who are not white, who are out of the dominant kinship group, are oppressed, killed, and dominated by members of the dominant group. So misandry means the hatred of men. But when you talk about white supremacy and racism, you're talking about how patriarchy hierarchalizes lesser men that they think are a threat to their racial superiority. Say it differently. When you look at all the laws they passed so that Black men don't have sex with white women, those laws were passed because if Black men have sex with white women, it messes up the white race. You don't know who's white anymore. So in order to make sure that didn't happen, you have to specifically target groups of men who are outside of your dominant racial group as being deviant, negative, pathological, and fundamentally unworthy of humanity. Because if you don't, then groups tend to intermix and intermarry. And because whiteness is a recessive gene, generally whiteness goes out of fashion very quickly, right? So anti-Black misandry is talking about the specific hatred and the negative racial or racist stereotypes that are attached to Black men because of their sex, right? And so that's what anti-Black misandry is trying to capture.
I want to comment a little bit on how white people and how their worldview and perspective in the academy, but I think this occurs outside the academy. Real quickly, when I first interviewed to be part of the doctoral program at the California Institute for Political Studies in San Francisco, I had to go through like everybody did, not just me, a gauntlet of being interviewed by current PhD professors and students who were in progress and who had excelled in the PhD program. And it was this very involved, complex interview process to see if I was, able to handle a PhD program. But one of the things this all-white group told me when I got finished, when they debriefed my interview, they said, "You're so honest." They said, and two of them said, "You're so frank and you're so honest." And I said, because I got to be me, what are you?
Right.
If it's a big deal that I'm simply being honest from my worldview, what are you? Because you're making it real special that I'm honest and all I'm doing is just telling the truth about my perspective. So anyway, there's a lot of lying that apparently they were used to from Black people, which is really a lot of white accommodationist behavior.
Oh, absolutely.
That I wasn't doing, and they were dumbstruck. And part of the first thing they said to me was, "God, you're so honest," which means Black folks, that a lot of us are accommodating white people to the point of being pathological liars on their behalf, and getting jobs, getting paid, getting degrees, making them comfortable as a lifestyle instead of empowering Black people and being involved in a reparative, co-humanizing agenda for Black people. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I just want to mention that. And I also,
but it's important.
Yes.
But this is what I mean is that we all have these experiences, right? We all have these experiences. I was told by a colleague after I got the job at Edinburgh. I had lunch with a colleague at A&M, and he's like, "Well, you don't play the game, right?"
Right.
And in his mind, he was supportive. He was congratulating me, good white liberal. But he was like, "Well, you're not like, because you don't play the game. So this and that." I was like, "But you understand that by you saying that there's a game and recognizing I don't play it, that you expect a level of subservience from other Black scholars. You expect other Black scholars to come in, appreciate being there, right? Take their place next to white people as being subordinates, even though they know they're more talented. You expect me to sit here and let white women tell me that they're the most oppressed group when they systematically oppressed and sexually molested my group. You want these kinds of ideas to go unchallenged. And then when white liberals have an agenda, be it a white gay agenda or a capitalist / worker or union agenda or a gender agenda, whatever agenda the left comes up with, you expect my undying loyalty to those agendas because you believe that you're the hand that feeds me. So you don't want to hear about Black men. You want to hear about white women, white lesbian groups, or white gay groups, or white poor white people, or white feminist, right? You want me to fundamentally endorse the humanity and agenda to every group you have. But then when we see Mr. Floyd being publicly lynched, because we have to remember his murder was not only captured on tape, but there was a crowd of people there telling the officers to stop. Nobody actually stopped the officer, but there were crowds of witnesses looking at this man die, right? So why can't I advocate for myself? I'm not here saying anything bad about Black women. I'm not saying anything bad about any particular agenda, be it the gay white agenda, the trans agenda, etc. I'm not hostile to anybody, but there is absolute aversion to me saying that I want to study Black men on their own terms.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. And as somebody who is a chief advisor for an organization called the Black Men's Exchange, I can tell you what it's like to hear no from all walks of life when you ask for support for the continuation of the organization. But you mentioned something much earlier.
Yes.
In this conversation, Dr. Curry, you mentioned that even though you write, even in your book, in terms of consideration of the issues facing same-gender loving people or homosexual people or the word white people call gay, you still can be accused because they're not listening or reading and getting beyond the veil of your Black maleness to see the substance of what you actually said. Right. You were assumed to be, because you walk around here loving a woman as well, while being a Black man that ain't light-skinned enough, you are being seen as somebody who could never be a so-called ally. So I raised that because there's likely a large number of people who are watching this who are men who love men and women who love women. Mm-hmm. How do you, if you do, or can you speak to resistance to engaging homosexual and bisexual people? I'm not using the word same-gender loving consistently now because I know that you have a critique of the term gender, and that might be.
But my critique should, that's an academic argument.
I ain't doing gay. I ain't doing gay. Get that. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make to you is that we have a large audience, membership of this audience who likely are what I call same-gender loving people, bisexual people, etc. And there are people in our community who are reactionary, typically from when they keep writing, when they write me, from a masculinity anxiety perspective. What'd you say? What did you say? I thought you said
just on my screen, y'all are freezing. I just want to make sure it's only me.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you said something. So I wanted to ask Dr. Curry, how do you deal with the hardcore assumption that you don't have any concern about this community?
Yeah.
And how do you, this is two different questions.
Sure.
And how do you explain the anti-homosexual terror and reactionary behavior among some men who allege that they're heterosexual, Black men?
Yeah. So I'll start with the later. I think that the homonegativity or homophobia that we see amongst some heterosexual Black men is partly born out of ignorance and born out of an anxiety about their own position in the world. I have a hard time not going back into data because, it's one of those things when you look at homosexuality or homophobia in Black community, the Black community itself is relatively conservative on those issues largely based on religion. But heterosexual Black men are not generally more homophobic than heterosexual Black women. It's just that as Black women because Black women are more educated and have more socioeconomic mobility than Black men, as they, in their latter years, as they become more educated and have a more middle class lifestyle, their views change, right? So I think it's important to contextualize that. I don't think that any notion of Black masculinity has historically embraced homophobia and homonegativity as its base. Said differently, when you look at like the work that you got out coming out of the Black Panther Party, like people who were not fundamentally religious, you get a different view of sexuality, right? You know, and the reason I put Eldridge Cleaver in the book is because I said, isn't it interesting that the Black macho has all these writings about loving another Black man? And I tried to make sure the readers of the book didn't get pulled into that. I was like, that's not the highlight. The highlight is that as a Black man who loved another Black man, looking at the prison system and understanding the homoerotic machinations that the prison had on Black men generally, how we were just corpses being stored for the sexual pleasure of white guards. I think that we have to start looking at, instead of focusing on identity, we have to start looking at the experiences of Black men who have sex and love other men, and what that tells us about some of the dynamics that we don't see. And that's what I was trying to do in the book. I think the people who criticize me for not coming from a queer theory lens do so because they want an identity frame. And I'm interested in Black men. And there are Black men who have sex with and love other Black men. And that's just been the case since the beginning of time. So I don't know what to tell somebody about the fact that you want me to introduce an identity term when I know that history's been full of Black men who love other Black men and have sex with other men who fundamentally are down for Black people. Like, I don't understand that. And I don't understand it because I don't have the same kind of religiosity. I didn't grow up with the same kind of religious assumptions about heterosexuality that I think that a lot of our community did. So those aren't starting points for me. But let me talk to the reactionary point, because I think this is important. The kinds of reactionary responses, and I've gotten this a lot from activists or woketivists. The assumption is that if you don't prefer their view of identity, like a queer or queer identity, that somehow that means you're antagonistic.
Yep.
And what I've tried to explain is, I find it interesting, and I've had this conversation in several places. I find it interesting that you have no problem with works like Patricia Hill Collins, you know, Black Feminist Thought, or even Intersectionality, that make no mention whatsoever of gay Black men or queer Black men. But my book, which actually does, because I'm trying to figure out how white homoeroticism imposes itself, right, at a fundamental level, right? This notion of men having sex with and sexually exploiting other men at a fundamental level of social processes affect how we think about racism. And I literally tell you, this is what I'm doing by analyzing the texts and writings of a Black man who has sex with other men as the basis of understanding this process. And you don't see yourself in that text. So you see yourself in femininity, but you don't see yourself in maleness or masculinity. And this is, and I say it like that because this is what I'm fascinated by. I think the reactionism, it comes from this need to distance yourself from Black men. That somehow we've bought into this lie that feminism has given us, that says that gayness or queerness is somehow a retreat or separate from patriarchy. So this reaction becomes a way to say, look, the Black women, the Black homosexual community, we're separate than these other Black men, because these Black men are evil, these Black men are pathological, we're the liberatory and woke voices. But and this is why I put this in the book, what this kind of reactionary ethos does is it completely flatlines the history of homoerotic abuse and sexuality in the world. All kinds of white homosexuals were anti-Black. The rape that you see throughout slavery and Jim Crow in colonies is based on the homosexuality and queerness or bisexuality, whatever you want to call it, of the white oppressor. So then what at the baseline extricates those same-sex practices of white people from the dynamics of how you define homosexuality in general? You see, if you buy into the liberal myth that women and white and homosexuals are outside of patriarchy, then you have a whole lot of explaining to do why these women and homosexuals were right there with the patriarchs, killing and sleeping with and lynching natives.
I'd like to add to that, Dr. Curry.
Yes.
I was in a conversation a couple of days ago where some of these issues came up inadvertently. But the fact of the matter is the homosexual community, and this includes elements of the Black homosexual community, profoundly privileges classic patriarchal masculine performance.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of homosexual people who will not talk to no man who shows any level of femininity, because as far as they're concerned, they're not a man. And this is a patriarchal perspective.
Absolutely.
There's also trans people that I've met, male to female trans, who purposely target heterosexual men to be with, because as far as they're concerned, men who have sex with other men are not as much of a man as a man who has sex with a woman. But they'll call you homophobic. There's also people who claim that homosexuals cannot be misogynistic, which is insane. I mean, a lot of there are homosexuals who refer to women as fish and all kinds of disrespectful terminologies. And so not only is it's strange to claim that there's no patriarchal or even toxic patriarchal problem within this community, it's literally delusional, because all you can do is go outside and listen. And it's in the anti-female Black, or not necessarily Black, but male masculine celebratory behavior, particularly after 9 o'clock, as Duke mentioned, it's very, very present. So there's so many contradictions that there's conversations that we need to have so it can be less chaotic and more clear for resolving Black conflict, because that's my concern. My concern, that's why I don't do gay and queer and all those racist, white supremacist paradigms, because they're not helpful to us. And I'm trying to be consistently an asset to Black people, even in terms of talking about identity. Because when you go into whiteness to frame who you are, it's like walking into a parasite's arms voluntarily, even though it's conditional behavior. But we're getting closer to the end. You know, I don't want to take you from your family for the rest of your life over there in Europe. And I was wondering, is there any more questions or comments coming from the online folks?
No, we don't have anything coming from Facebook.
I don't see anything.
I have one question though.
Sure.
Yes, Mr. Williams.
Dr. Curry, could you just quickly expand on that whole context of Stokely Carmichael and a speech that he gave to SNCC, when he basically said that the only position for women in the SNCC is prone, and in that one sentence essentially was just blown out of context, and a lot of feminists, Black and white, jump on that one statement that he made in that speech to say that the Black Panther movement was anti-woman and anti-feminist. Could you talk about that for a minute?
No, I'd be happy to. Let me preface that by saying that, you know, I think you can see from the book that everything that's been said about us, I just went and tracked down the original source to find out if it was true, right? And when I did a lot of this primary research, going back, because, you know, Stokely actually said that to 2 white women, one of which was named Mary King, and the other one I think was named Casey Hayden. And so I went and read their autobiographies of their time in SNCC, and they both talk about this working paper where Carmichael made this comment. And, you know, both of the white women say, look, you know, we were in SNCC, the women didn't know what their roles were, the men assumed certain kind of leadership positions. And, you know, they wrote this paper and it circulated around SNCC, and they were at some kind of writing retreat or a group retreat to plan the activities of SNCC. And he made this joke to lighten the air so that people would not feel anxiety about it, but actually started discussing the paper. In both of those autobiographies, they both say that they thought he was the most progressive person on gender of his time. They describe SNCC as a womanist organization. There's been other correspondence and writings by people like Joyce Ladner, who was also a Black woman in SNCC, that kind of confirmed and corroborated some of their accounts. I think, again, this goes back to why I'll say it this way, because this is the way my wife and I talk about it. When we want to find out if white people are racist or white people are sexist, all we have to do is listen to any speech or essay to do it. When we talk about black men being sexist, somehow in the last 200 years, black men haven't written a single thing that have called black women out their name outside of hip hop or made any kind of political declarations or treatises that said that black women were inferior. So our whole notion of black men being misogynistic and homophobic comes from interpretations we have of groups that existed 50 or 60 years ago. Like if I wanted to talk about Immanuel Kant's racism, I literally have to just go to Kant's books and start highlighting all the racist and sexist things he said. But you can't do that with black men. So what we end up doing is we take these quotes that were first quoted in 1978 and we just keep rehashing them. Evidently, the only proof we have of black men being sexist is what Stokely Carmichael said, the fact that W.E.B. Du Bois didn't include Ida B. Wells on the list of the founders of the Niagara movement, and that black men got the right to vote before black women. Right? Like this is what we're talking about, right? Or in the Black Panther Party, some black men beat black women who didn't comply. Right? Like this is what we're talking about. Anecdotal accounts, anecdotal stories are decontextualized quotes. And that's not to take away from the stories of someone like Elaine Brown, who was in Taste of Power, talks about this stuff, but it's not to ignore the fact that Elaine Brown, in an argument with Alice Walker, said the same stuff I said happened to me, I did to other people. Right? Like it's about us pigeonholing the narrative around black men as pathological, and even with no textual evidence, that becoming the dominant conversation. Like I don't understand how we interpret black men as misogynist, homophobic, etc. When you have throughout history black men having organizations that included women before white people did. You have black men including trans rights or trans workers within workers' rights movements. There's all kind of evidence that black men just don't have the same kind of political agendas that white people have. And that's not me excusing.
Once a black man is accused, no evidence or vetting is needed or necessary.
No, absolutely.
What I always say is that we're guilty until proven guilty.
Yeah.
So the thing that's, I just want to say, like, what's really interesting about all this is because when I had this in dialogue is that seemingly our quote unquote allies get this and know this when I'm talking about black women and black queers, whenever a white cop says it. But the moment one of their particular communities say this particular information, all of a sudden it's true. All of a sudden this is what we're really dealing with.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I want to do before we end, Mr. Calvin Mann has made this request, and I agree with this request, is I want the last part of our conversation to be nothing but solutions.
Fair enough.
Nothing but a checklist kind of situation where people can see solutions that they can apply to their lives relevant to this issue of black men, envy, conflict, and murder, and performance in society right now, caring about or claiming to care about us after the zillionth murder on video, etc. What are solutions to deflecting or preventing the further dehumanization and destruction of black males as a norm?
Well, I'll start off. I think that every black man in America should be conversed in black male studies. I think that we have to take a proactive stance in educating ourselves about the myth that lies about ourselves, right? And I mean this as a community, so I'm saying all black men, right? We have to work out the different kinds of tensions that we have, or what the world is telling us the differences that we have between each other, straight, gay, poor, rich, etc. My work is a call for black men to understand themselves differently, right? The other thing is I think we have to start talking about trauma. When you actually read, Finding Fish, which is what the Antoine Fisher story was actually about, it's a powerful account of how he had to deal with trauma. So Denzel Washington's character in that movie helps him peel back the layers of what trauma built around him, because he always had these issues of violence, and they kept calling him violent. And it wasn't until he actually started dealing with the kind of abuse and the unwantedness, and that's another really important piece about young black boys, that black boys are actually put in positions of being unwanted. They get put in foster care. Nobody wants to adopt Black boys. They're the most, they're the highest represented group that ends up aging out. And that means that they have tremendous vulnerability to different kinds of physical and sexual violence under foster care. So we need people who understand the humanity of Black men that are willing to go in and actually work with them and understand this pain, understand this vulnerability. One of the things I do is I actually Skype in every semester to a class out in California, social workers, and we talk about some of these issues, and I urge them to develop practical protocols for dealing with Black men and boys as their clients, right? I think that there's a tremendous amount of work that has to go into that. And lastly, I think that we need political organizations around the interests of Black men and boys. Saying that we're interested in Black men and boys does not mean that we're somehow against women or any other group, but it means that we recognize there's age of incarceration, police homicide, downward mobility that's not being addressed under a general rubric of racism, anti-Blackness, or even Black Lives Matter rhetoric. We have to be very careful here because you remember, Black Lives Matter is arguing that, I mean, like if you read the Say Her Name report, it only talks about domestic abuse and sexual violence at the hands of cops or intimates from the perspective of women. It makes no analysis whatsoever, despite court cases going on right now about where Black men are trying to get compensation and recognized as victims of rape. It recognizes none of those kinds of injuries that Black men suffer from being sodomized and penetrated by cops during stops or by frisk or searches. So there are tremendous issues that we don't even have a full lens or grasp on that need to be adjudicated as not only as a matter of political advocacy, but one in terms of the law and in terms of legality, right? And the last thing I say is that we need to start having a very real conversation about a Black male standard in the engagement with the criminal justice system. Black men have some of the most negative outcomes interacting with the criminal justice system at all levels, from police encounters to juvie to trial and to jury and trial, and of course, as we know, mass incarceration. So the reasonable person standard that we see in jurisprudence being used to say whether or not the violence of certain police officers or the views of certain juries are reasonable really do need to be adjusted based on the experience of Black men, given that they seem to be the ones that constantly and consistently get put at the bottom of every kind of judicial and criminal justice kind of apparatus that we have in the United States. And this means a full-blown assault on qualified immunity, which is the Graham versus Connor decision that gives police the benefit of the doubt in how they interact with private citizens and civilians. Until Black men are positioned as uniquely vulnerable, both through their death and through the ignoring of their sexual vulnerability, I don't think we have any hope of actually overcoming the apparatus that Black Lives Matter claims that it's actually trying to work against.
Thank you for that. And if one day we're gonna have a show, and you can be invited. It might not be at 3 o'clock, but we're gonna do a deconstruction of Black Lives Matter, because there's some issues there that are not good.
For a 3-hour show, Cleo.
That we might have to bring sleeping bags. But anyway,
to break all that down.
There's some issues there that are ironic, given that they're considered the gatekeepers of Black male lives, and talk about delusion. But anyway, I'm not gonna get into that right now because that's gonna provoke some people watching.
No, but it's an important point, though, Doctor.
You must have brought your sleeping bag, but I'm listening.
Yeah, but it's an important point because listen, I'm not against anybody trying to fight for Black people, right? My issue with Black Lives Matter is not they're trying to fight for Black people. My issue with Black Lives Matter is how they buy into notions about Black male deviance and pathology to launch the platform for other groups of people. And there's been several studies that have come out that have shown that Black Lives Matter is perceived as being more violent the more they advocate for Black men. So there's kind of a bait and switch here where you're putting more palatable Black bodies in front of white liberal audiences and philanthropic organizations to get funding, and then excluding the people who are the majority of the victims of the kinds of police brutality, homicide, and mass incarceration systems you claim you have an issue with. So even though it's a movement, that does not mean that Black men, especially the Black people, should not ask the very fundamental question, which is, do the leaders of this movement and does this organization in fact advocate for my interests? That seems to be a simple question that Black men are not being allowed to ask right now.
To be even clearer, does this organization have the interests of Black men
Absolutely.
central to it? I mean, I want to make the question totally unabstract. Are you
Right.
really about the humanity of Black men? Because see, people, I was asking some white people who I was asked to speak to on a Zoom discussion, because I really do that, talk to white people about anything concerning Black people, but I was asked to do this. And I asked them, why y'all all in the streets now because of Floyd, when we have a Tamir Rice, a baby who was murdered and blah, 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 what's going on? And I want to ask Black Lives Matter, what's going on? Because you have not been around since before Trump became president, and the body count has been rising, and you have not been in the streets. But now you're in the streets, after, like the white folks, interestingly enough, since George Floyd. But again, I don't got time to get in that because we'd be here forever.
Oh, but it's a front. Like, you can't have 2,200 Black men get killed in 6 years.
Yeah.
And then right, like, what's the performance? Right? What's the performance? It's not like the number. The number has decreased.
Provocative, Dr. Curry. I know it's provocative because you know what's going on, and it's frustrating to see.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's provocative. It's just like, you ain't did nothing. If the numbers keep increasing, if Black men keep dying, and you keep saying that you're here to decrease death, one of those two things have to be empirically true.
Exactly. And it goes back to your original question, which is, do you really care about the lives of Black men? And where is the policy evidence? Where's the behavioral evidence? Where's the action evidence? But again, I'm gonna get
science,
let alone the science, which and the data. But I'm trying to get off. I've been trying for 10 minutes to get off. Are you getting ready to talk about Black Lives Matter, Roger?
No, I'm not actually. No, I'm actually, in terms of solutions.
We're in solutions mode, but go on.
No. In terms of solutions, though, I'm actually going to steal a solution from Duke. I don't know if he remembers this, but he actually said something powerful in another panel that you guys had, that BMX had, that hosted after Billy Porter released his rant and very irresponsible. Anyway, but Duke said something so powerful to me, and I don't know if he realizes that. But he said basically, Black SGL men need to stop running away from their own communities. You know, we keep running away from each other, and we keep running away from other Black men. And I think that's why we have the Billy Porters of the world and the Terry Crews, but he's not SGL, but we are running away from each other.
Our knowledge.
So I think a solution is, I'm not saying everybody should be up there and be a super Cleo 2.0, but I feel like what we need to do is, and I'm also preaching to myself, I need to do a better job of that, is to stop being afraid of our own people, stop being afraid of each other, put ourselves in the community with a level of understanding of the history and the bombardment of outside forces trying to literally destroy our communities. Go into things with that frame, not as a victim necessarily, but just with that understanding, so that, number one, you don't get frustrated over and over again when you see certain actions in our community, but also so that you don't shut down and become ineffective as well. And so, I just feel like we need to stop running away from each other. And I don't know if you noticed that, Duke, but that spoke to me when you said that.
I appreciate that, brother. I had some solutions that I had. So I wrote down everything that Dr. Curry said, because I think I want to make a pin comment for the video. But on top of that, some practical solutions that I had in my limited capacity, because I'm not a scholar, I'm a poet. I said, I think that everyone who's interested in this work to any degree should be following or researching different Black scholars who are into this work in the first place. I think too oftentimes we allow the trickle-down telephone effect of academic language to reach our communities, but we don't use it the correct way. And we harm each other in this particular work. And so I think that you need to become friends with the Dr. Tommies, the Dr. Cleo Managos, the Joy DeGrues, the Stacey, become friends with these people. Additionally, something that I have done in my personal life, which I found very effective, is I have a requirement for friendship, right? And literally one of my requirements for friendship is that you have to watch an hour-long video from Dr. Joy DeGruy about post-traumatic slave syndrome. And I have dialogues and conversations with these particular, and it's mostly been men that I do it with. I've done it with women too. But I've had dialogues with these men. And once it's over, I'm like, all right, and they love it. They love these videos. They never had an opportunity to see themselves in this light or deconstruct these things. I say, all right, but now you gotta watch it with your girlfriend, like Netflix and Dr. Joy DeGruy, like or whatever, Dr. Joy DeGruy and chill. So these are I think, practical things like that. Additionally, and you mentioned it a lot in your book, is also part of Cleo's work. It is about really having dialogues about how we racialize each other. Every single time there's a particular incident that is a negative experience, we racialize the entire race around that particular experience. And specifically when it comes to Black males, you put the genre aspect to it, which creates the dysfunction and the lack of accountability in our communities when we harm each other. And lastly, and because we were talking about sexuality and all these other things earlier, thankfully, I've had the opportunity to meet Cleo Monago and run into same gender loving or SGL language, which is a pathway for Black folks to identify with who that term fits. But I think at the end of the day, and Cleo could correct me if I'm wrong, for me, my sexuality is Black. My gender is Black. The way that I work and eat and move about my community is Black. Is that diverse? And what this terminology allows for, even with same gender loving, it allows for a gateway or a pathway outside of that white queer paradigm, white supremacist paradigm. And whatever gateway or bridge you need to get out of white queerness, take it. But eventually, I believe that you need to become very, very clear about who you are and where you stand at in America, in as the world as a whole. But I just want to finish with that.
Thanks. Did you have some solutions, Kashama, before I bring my solution?
I'll be real quick with them. First of all, I want to piggyback off of what Dr. Curry said in regards to how important it is for Black men to take up Black male studies. And what I'll say is I'll frame it a little bit differently, because I know everyone is not necessarily in the place to sit down and read as much as do for myself or some other brothers might be, due to just lifestyle. You never know what family dynamics are like. Some brothers, just are too busy for that. But I think it's important that we as Black men begin to think about and understand the gender nuance of our Black oppression, or how white power hits us in that special way as Black men, that we are only hit. And when doing that gives us the ability, because I see among too many Black men is that we internalize these beliefs and we treat other Black men, particularly Black men that are younger than us, in ways that are not beneficial. So we need to internalize a lot of the understanding of Black male nuanced oppression, and understand that if there is nothing wrong with us. Another thing to address, one of the brothers were asking about being labeled angry, and I be on your Facebook page, Dr. Curry, so I know about the whole thing about being labeled arrogant,
Oh, yes.
and all that stuff. We got to own that shit, because there are reasons for us to be angry, and if you know what the hell you're talking about and you stand on it, you have the right to be arrogant or confident or whatever. Let's stand on that, and don't hide from it. Don't cower from it. That's power. That's how you stand in power. And no, you won't necessarily be rewarded for it. Understand that mediocrity among Black men gets rewarded before
Absolutely.
a lot of other stuff, a lot of competence. So understand that, and don't let society gaslight you into believing that you're doing something wrong or something's wrong with you, when they're all playing games. And also realize that there's a lot of games that white society will play with you that they know better. They know what angry looks like. Believe me, you Black man gets angry, they'll run out the room. So don't let that make you cower away from your own strength, your own power, your own knowledge. And I believe we'll be better for it, and our struggles will be more defined, and we will have more control over it.
Thank you, Kashama. And I think, speaking of anger, that people understand that, and James Baldwin said something about anger and Black folks. What did he say when he James Baldwinologist?
He said to be Black and angry.
To be a Black in America is to be enraged all the time.
Yeah, to be Black and relatively conscious is to be in a state of anger.
Yeah, I think it's important for the audience to recognize who have the unconscious anti-Black impulse in their psyche that we need to stop being concerned about Black people being angry because it's intelligent to be angry under the circumstances.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's intelligent. It makes sense. It's necessary, and you have a mental problem or real good numbing skills if you don't have anger. And just because you have the capacity of anger does not mean you don't have the capacity to love and care and be profoundly nurturing and those other human capacities. Being angry, particularly righteous anger, does not eliminate those capacities. One of the things that gets us caught up in not being present for what we fully are, putting us in a trance state and making us numb, is that we think the opposite of pro-Black is anti-white. Well, as I always say over and over again, you brothers heard me say it before, the opposite of pro-Black is anti-Black. We're pro-abortion, anti-abortion, not pro-abortion, anti-chicken. And that's what you're doing when you make it anti-white. It's not logical. Yeah. But when you live in a white supremacist, white accommodationist culture, by all means, do not be pro-Black, and by all means, not be anti-white. So they put them together artificially to short circuit your capacity to be intelligent enough to be righteously angry about real stuff.
What happened? Respond to it.
What George Floyd went through, he was brother number probably 1 million or something if you look at it from 1619 up until now. And now they didn't have cell phones, up until very recently. But what happened to him is not brand new, and that we're responding in a way that's brand new is racist, because it ain't brand new. No matter how well you're acting now, and you got your red, black, and green, your kente cloth, if you just bought that cloth, you are racist. So I want to make that clear in case people think that they're off the hook now because they went to Washington, D.C. with a Black Lives Matter, which is an impotent organization in terms of Black life anyway, organization banner. But in terms of solutions, those are some of the solutions that I had in terms of understanding that the opposite of pro-Black is not anti-white, it's anti-Black, which we need to resist. And that we need to also remember that anger is a necessary and intelligent response to what Black people go through. And if you have the capacity to be angry, that means you have the capacity to love Black people, that you are loving Black people. And when you're Black and loving Black people, that's also intelligent. We have to tap into our intelligence instead of being dumb for white folks. Also, I want us to be very thoughtful about the media. The media is an anti-Black death trap. I've already broken down some of the examples earlier in this show about shows that we love and adore that teaches us to be anti-Black and to dehumanize Black people. And we either have to stop watching them or watch them with a critical eye. For example, when you watch a Superman film, you know that people really can't fly. So you have a critical understanding logically that that's fantasy. But when you watch a lot of these shows on TV that are anti-Black perpetually, like this show For Life, which is a hit on ABC about a brother in jail, though they claim it's based on real life because brothers are in jail, they're in jail because of white supremacy, racism, and they're in jail because of corruption, human corruption, not because this is the way things are. So one of my solutions, people, is to watch the media with a critical eye. And if you caught up with so many shows because you like the way the people act, watch it from a critical perspective and watch it and look at it analytically and deconstruct the anti-Blackness and recognize it so you don't internalize it and act out on Black people and dehumanize Black people, which is the agenda of this stuff. And I'll reiterate the importance of understanding Black male studies, even though people can't read. There are audiobooks. I'm not sure if there's an audiobook for you yet. There is. So now you can put it in your on your computer and your whatever your young folks, Apple, Pear, Peach, all that stuff. You now don't have no reason not to listen to the text of Brother Tommy Curry and what he's broken down in this book so excellently for Black people to look at. And the other solution I give is for us to understand that, and this is my final one, that this is not a neutral, shut up, Kashama. This is not a neutral society.
It's true.
Stop walking around here thinking that it's a neutral society and being mad at the person who tells you that it is. This is an anti-Black, white supremacist society, which is why a scholar on the level of intelligence as a Dr. Tommy J. Curry has to get up and go all the way to Edinburgh to do what he studied to do, what he got his PhD PhD in, what he wrote a book about, to actually fulfill the promise of his work reaching higher heights, because this country was too low to let him reach his heights. So let's be real clear. This is not a neutral society, or else Tommy would be right here, close to his mama or whoever he got here. That's part of his life. He'd be right here, but what he wanted to do is work for us. So he sacrificed and went over there to Europe, where they allowed him to do what he's doing from a principal professor level and the leader of where he's working. So those are my suggestions. I also suggest that people rewind this video from the beginning and get some popcorn and stuff and watch it again, because it's full of nuggets that we can benefit from. And I want to tell Dr. Curry, because I saw him jump up a little bit. We mentioned Billy Porter and roll his eyes. I could feel the wind. I could feel the wind from Europe all the way over here. I'm like, damn. Anyway, we did a video on Billy Porter that you might want to go watch.
Yeah, definitely.
We did an impromptu out the sky blue, because I wasn't gonna say nothing. I was gonna go about my business and go live my life. I wasn't gonna say nothing about him. But because the people kept making their requests, I said, okay, I want to do a reaction video, because I didn't even watch it, but I was going to watch it in the presence of Duke and Kashama, and as my moral support to hold me up while I sit through this crap and do a reaction video. But I couldn't even. I think we watched 45 seconds.
It was horrible. It was horrible.
I couldn't do it. So you might want to watch that if you want to hear.
Absolutely.
And trust me, it wasn't the same old crap you hear in every place else. We broke it down.
No, but I'm happy to hear that.
But thank you, brother.
No, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tommy J. Curry. I have to say the whole name because I want to become a household word. Dr. Tommy J. Curry. It's practice, Dr. Tommy J. Curry, because your work is seminal.
Thank you. Thank you.
Your work is life-saving. Your work is humanizing. And it's backed up with facts.
Brother, the minute I discovered you, I discovered a whole bunch of Black men that are my social media contacts and friends who were already following you. And I was like, oh, where have I been?
No, man, if I could just say, I'm so humbled by this. You know, when I started working on this, you know, and I want to, you know, we have a group of Black men, you know, T. Hassan Johnson, Ronald Neal, you know, William A. Smith, you know, Stacey Patton, you know, doing tremendous work for Black men and boys about abuse. You know, there's a community of scholars who take the interest in the lives of Black men seriously. You know, so I'm always so humbled when people, you know, because when you write a book, you think, oh, I'm writing about an argument. And when I wrote the book, I wanted Black men to love each other and not fear each other.
Yeah.
You know, and I think anybody who's read the book can see how much effort I'm putting into us loving ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. That it's not about our identity. It's about look at all the stuff they say about us. Look at what they tell us about ourselves. That we hate our mothers, that we hate our daughters, that we hate the men we're sleeping with, that we, you know, everything about us becomes this negativity. And I thought that wouldn't it be great if we had a book, an academic book, not a self-help book, an academic book that we could say, look, this defends us, right? It defends all of us. It's not some, you know, nascent, only be one thing. It's like, why does the world hate Black men? And let's explore that. So I'm again, thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm incredibly humbled to be engaged on this work. So thank you.
Well, thank you for accepting the invitation. And Roger, you had something to say before we go?
No, I was just going to quickly say that we didn't hear any solutions from Adam or Anthony.
Okay, well, Adam is a producer, so he can say something if he's, you know, if he's wants to. That's going to last a few seconds because we get ready to end this. But and Anthony could have spoken. Anthony is a young brother who works at our organization, Dr. Curry, who is shy and doesn't want to be on camera, but he's there. And he could have said something throughout the show. You know, all you had to do was let Adam know, but he didn't say nothing. So I guess he was sitting here watching and loving it. But we must go, y'all. Anthony, Anthony, did you know?
Hello.
Hi, Anthony.
Hey.
Did you have a quick?
No, I was just soaking all of this in, like, because a lot of this stuff is new to me.
Okay.
Just like,
okay, then go,
like,
go
you
soak.
know, yeah.
Go soak. Finish soaking. But one day we want to hear from you, brother. All right. Well, thanks again. Thanks to the audience.
Thank you.
We expect that as usual, thousands will connect to us afterwards because it's on their schedule often when people watch the show, particularly with this new hour for the day. And we'll be hearing a lot of feedback, which we look forward to. And we look forward to further conversations with you, Dr. Curry. And it's wonderful to
Happy to have
you again. And thanks again.
Thank you so much for the support, sir. Really
Not a
appreciate it.
problem. It's our pleasure. It's for our people. And have a good night.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, brothers.
Thank you, Dr.
Bye, y'all. I'm pressing the leave button.